Hey, what's party? Welcome back to News Toast, and once again, the internet is freaking out about PlayStation possibly going multi-platform, or at least to some degree. This has been a growing narrative here recently, partially because, Sony already has pushed for games like Helldivers 2 on Xbox, and they've even released a few games on Nintendo as well. But now to add to that, Sony's leadership seems to be indicating a future with less reliance on their hardware. Now the main question is, what exactly did they mean by that? And we're going to get into all of that today. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, starting off with a new Hexen and Heretic collection for modern platforms. If you remember right, a couple years ago, Phil Spencer showed up on stage with a Hexen t-shirt, which caused a lot of speculation at that time. And that's because, anytime he does that, there's always a pretty good chance that, said game will eventually happen. So here we have it. Phil's t-shirt once again delivered the future, and this collection is actually available to play right now as we speak. It's only going for $15, which is actually very impressive considering the amount of content that you get with this collection. It includes Heretic, Shadow of the Serpent Riders, Hexen Beyond Heretic, Hexen Death Kings of the Dark Citadel, and 2 brand new episodes created in collaboration between both id Software and Night Dive Studios. On top of that, you're also going to get a lot of multiplayer content, whether that be competitive or cooperative. So this has a ton of content, both new and old, and this is something that we have seen from these retro Bethesda games these past few years. They did the same thing with Doom and Quake, and there's a lot of studios out there that simply releases remasters with only a few enhancements, a few minor enhancements, and nothing else. But Bethesda and Night Dive Studios, they tend to go all out. They really seem passionate about making these experiences for their longtime fans, and we really need more of that within the game industry. Now, moving on here, though, we got another update for Contraband. If you missed yesterday's video, there were reports that Xbox canceled Contraband, but that doesn't seem entirely true after all. Instead, it actually sounds like they canceled their publishing contract and will no longer be funding Avalanche Studios. However, it sounds like the game itself isn't completely canceled after all. Avalanche did release their own statement, which you can read here. They said, an update on Contraband. Over the past several years, Avalanche Studios Group and Xbox Game Studios Publishing have collaborated on Contraband. Active development has now stopped while we evaluate the project's future. We're thankful for the excitement we've seen from the community since we announced, and will give an update on what's next as soon as we can. So in other words, Contraband isn't necessarily entirely canceled. It sounds like there is a chance that it could still release, but they would either have to find a new publisher or they would have to do it independently. And, if they go into that direction, there will be a lot more risk involved. So I think a lot of that decision will kind of depend on how close it is to release. But the fact that they haven't shown any gameplay or really any kind of update since 2021, it's hard to say how far along they are in development. If I were to make a prediction, my guess is that it's probably still a ways off. I can't imagine that Xbox will pull out just ahead of its release unless it just doesn't look good at all. So we'll see what happens with all this, but there's definitely a chance that it could return in some shape or form. Now, speaking of Xbox, though, the Xbox ROG Ally release date just leaked out online. This comes from Bilbo Kuhn, which continues to be highly accurate with his leaks. So, there's a fairly good chance that this will turn out to be true. And according to him, at Gamescom on August 20th, Xbox will hold a special live broadcast, which they already announced, and this is where they'll allegedly announce the release date for the Xbox ROG Ally, which according to him will be on October 16th, or at least in Europe. Now, there's a small chance that other regions could slightly differ in their release dates, but more than likely this will apply to most major regions, and here's the thing. Some people noticed that Sarah Bond previously stated that Hollow Knight Silksong will be available at launch and in Game Pass when the Xbox ROG Ally releases. So that either implies that Silksong will launch side by side with the Xbox ROG Ally, or that it'll be out before them. Either which way, though, I mean, that's great news, and it sounds like we could get a release date for Silksong as well at that Xbox Gamescom showcase. I mean, we know for a fact that Silksong will be playable at the bare minimum on the Xbox ROG Ally at Gamescom, so this kind of makes sense in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so let's go and get into this big PlayStation story because people on all sides are going absolutely crazy over this. Some people are looking at this as another confirmation that they're doing away with some of their exclusivity, which we have seen signs that they are at the very least easing up on that strategy. Of course, Helldivers 2 is coming over to Xbox. They've been supporting PC for years, and they've even released a few games on the Nintendo Switch. They also had that recent multi-platform job listing, which just blew up online a few weeks back. So there is a reality that they've already eased up on their cutthroat exclusive-minded mentality that we've seen from them in previous generations, which only adds to the ongoing speculation that we're currently seeing. And this new statement has certainly added even more fuel to that fire because check this out. Genki posted this over on Twitter. Now, I want to go and give him credit because he's the one that translated all this, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Bear with me here for a second, but he said, Sony Senior Vice President Sadihiko Hayakawa says that they are gradually shifting their gaming business from a hardware-centric business model to a community and engagement-based platform business model. They said, and he quotes, "In the gaming business, we are moving away from a hardware-centric business model more to a platform business that expands the community and increases engagement." Now, the reason that I want to talk specifically about his tweet is because there are a few websites that picked up on this response, and if you were even claiming that it's out of context, and that's Sony's comment about them moving away from a hardware-centric business model isn't necessarily referring to PlayStation, but rather Sony as a company. You have to kind of keep in mind that they have a lot of hardware. They have cameras, they have Blu-ray players, they have headphones, and the list goes on and on and on. However, Genki has responded to those claims, and check out what he said. Personally, I do not think that PlayStation is totally getting rid of exclusives completely or giving up on making consoles. However, I listened to the Japanese version of the earnings call, and while the Sony SVP was talking about the overall Sony strategy of shifting to creation, the part about moving away from being a hardware-centric business increasingly to a platform business was specifically talking about the gaming business. So, there you go. Genki, I'd say, is a trustworthy person within the community. And from what I've seen from him, he does kind of lean more towards PlayStation than any other platform. So there's really no reason for him to bend the truth about what Sony said. So that does beg the question about what PlayStation meant by this statement. And I mean, I think there's already a pretty important clue that we have. That multi-platform job listing. Now, there's some people out there that are acting like that job listing means absolutely nothing. And okay, they can do that. But to me, that seems to fit in with a trend that we're seeing from Sony. They've already been dipping their toes into this multi-platform strategy. And my guess is that they're probably making a lot of money by doing that. And when a company makes a lot of money, well, you can then bank on them doing more of that in the future. Now, at the same time, I do agree with what Genki said. I don't believe that Sony is going to completely go away from their exclusives. I think their brand new AAA single-player games will continue to launch as exclusive titles for the time being. But I think we are moving into a realm where Sony is maybe a little bit more willing to open up their catalog of games for other platforms. Now, for the more immediate future, I suspect that that will mostly be for their live service games. But I do think that there's still a very realistic chance that we could eventually see some back catalog games from them on other platforms. They've already done that with Patapon, Everybody's Golf, and Freedom Wars as three such examples. I think my bigger question right now is, what would they consider back catalog? Could PlayStation 4 games, as one such example, be included in that strategy? And if so, could that open the door for games like Spider-Man, Bloodborne, Ratchet & Clank? There's The Last of Us, because, we all know that they love re-releasing that game. And the list just kind of goes on and on and on. Those games aren't really the games that are selling PlayStation 5 consoles. So that would be an easy way for them to kind of make money by porting them over to PC, to the Switch 2, and even on Xbox. In fact, I talked about it earlier in the week, but there is a game in their PlayStation 4 library that I think makes a lot of sense to go multi-platform, and that's Days Gone. Now, the reason I say that is because they recently canceled their live service project, and they laid off, I believe it was about 30% of that studio. I'll have to double check that, but unless they have another game that's far in development, I mean, a port for Days Gone would be one way for them to bring some money in for the nearest future. In fact, one thing that we've heard a lot about is the next Xbox. And the one thing that we keep hearing about it is that the next Xbox could possibly include Steam. So, I mean, if that turns out to be true, I mean, there's already a future where Xbox can play a lot of PlayStation games. PlayStation already releases a lot of games on Steam. So they're kind of getting around that exclusivity one way or another. And the way Sony, I'd say, is probably looking at all of this is, hey, you know, they're making a lot of money by porting their games to other platforms. They also see that Xbox is dominating their PlayStation Store right now. But even more so is that none of this is hurting PlayStation's hardware business. The PS5 is still selling incredibly well. So they're really getting the best of both worlds. They have their consoles where they can continue to sell their brand new exclusives. They get a cut from third-party games, and they also get all that money from their subscriptions. So as long as none of this is hurting their hardware business, I mean, they're kind of looking at this strategy as a win-win situation for them. But let me know what you all think about all this. How do you view what Sony said? And do you think that we're nearing a future where exclusives are starting to become a distant past? Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.